I think it's a very primitive attraction to the highway or something that represents spanning distance. I think distance has always been something that humans have been trying to conquer. And again, even the shape of the motorcycle represents, it's almost like a trophy over that conquest. And this country in particular, man, it's so big. It's got just some of the most beautiful, fantastical places. And if you're not riding a bike through them, you are missing something. My name's Todd Blubaugh, and I'm a writer and a photographer, and I live in the high desert of California. Well, I was pretty young when I got into writing. I lived behind a big open field in the middle of Kansas, and people would come and ride their motorcycles there. I kind of was under the impression that was a very adult activity until one day I saw some kid my age out there on a little motorcycle, a mini bike. I think I was probably about 10 or 11 years old, and that blew my mind open that you could be little and ride a bike, because I was used to seeing these huge dirt bikes, basically, they were well over the height of my head at the time. And that kind of spun me out, and I was just completely consumed by it. That's all I wanted when I was a little guy. I remember actually the first time I got to ride one, I was out in the field and I was shooting my bow and arrow. And one of these little guys came by in a mini bike, who was my age, and he was like, "Hey man, what's up? Cool bow and arrow." I was like, "Thanks. You want to shoot it? I'll trade you a ride for, if you want to shoot this thing." He's like, "Yeah, sure." And that was the first ride that I ever took. Long before I ever took that first ride, I think there was something that the idea of a motorcycle represented. That being this thing, this machine, you look at it, it's just two wheels and a motor, and you sit on it, and it becomes a part of you. It's just an extension of your body. That I was very captured by that idea, to the point where there was a garage on the way to school. Well, I used to walk to school. This was also the time when your kids could walk to school in a place. I'd walk by this garage. These guys would be out there working, and there was this one bike in the back that I took a liking to, and they were really kind. And when the garage door was open, they'd let me come in and look at the bike real closely, and then I'd go to school and I'd draw pictures of it throughout the day, and then on the way back, I'd come back and I'd show them a picture, and they'd show me what I had got wrong or right in that drawing. And that was my first introduction to it. I didn't have the kind of the family relationship to motorcycles. My dad was, he was very much loved cars, but motorcycles scared him because he had lost a few friends on him. So it was a big deal for him to let me get one for the first time. When I was 13, I taught my dad how to ride a motorcycle. So I had the opposite kind of upbringing with that. And he loved it, and this was dirt bike days. Then you go through these phases, I think, when you start a little younger, and dirt bikes are the introduction. When I left home and got into college, I had street bikes. I was really fond of Yamahas. The FZR was just outdated enough that I could afford it, and it was a really fast thrill. So I had a few of those in college. I had a Yamaha FJ1100, which was the fastest motorcycle I think I'll ever own. My dad actually made me sell that one because it was too fast. But then, it evolved, and you go through this stage of speed as a reckless younger person, and you start to figure out some of these bigger concepts. Like, I've resisted Harley-Davidsons for a very long time just because they looked kind of heavy, and they didn't have the line, at least the one, they didn't have the look of speed that I was really chasing. And not until I rode one for the first time was I was like, what is this thing underneath me? It's so violent, and you can hear it, and it was a different feeling. And after that, you're just hooked. after losing my parents in an accident. It's hard to have a right answer for that, because who really knows what the right thing to do is, or how you should feel at a certain point after a loss like that. But I know that there was healing that was happening on the highway. I can tell you, just by comparison to the rest of my family members that didn't do what I did, that I was far better off by the time that I got back than, or further down the process of grieving and these things. And that was because I took off on the road the way that I did. I met so many interesting people along the way that became very important to me, and they are the characters involved in my life even now. They changed my life, and this book is largely about them. The structure the book took is it's heavily visual with the photographs from the journey, and then there are these isolated vignettes that we tried to keep to about 2-page spreads that explain a happening. You know, that if you were to read the book in order from page 1 to 250, whatever it is, you could open up to these little vignettes and get a good conclusive understanding of what happened there on that event. And then you put those together and they would be this larger story of this trip. Or you could just take it in increments and you know, read it, put it down, and get something out of it. I kind of trying to experiment with these little collections of stories to explain a bigger picture. And then also a hard part of the construction of the book is we bound letters back to characters involved along the way into the construction of the book, which wasn't easy to do. Ginkgo Press did a really good job of that. So we had 7 early copies printed that went out to those that got letters in the book, and they got the first 7 copies. It was a lot like building a bike. You had to come up with these constructive solutions to your ideas. I mean, luckily, in a way, I didn't have any planning. My plan was to go down for Born Free, which we did every year. So that was fun. You know, it was like our vacation that we took as our little group of guys there in Washington. We spend most of the year building and wrenching just because it's wet. You know, it's a rough place to be in love with motorcycles. And so getting down to California for that, you know, week and a half was always what we looked forward to. Like I said, after we got down there, I just decided impulsively not to turn around and go back yet, and to keep going. And I met this guy, Ethan Fowler, down here, who had just gotten a bike, and he was pretty dissatisfied with Los Angeles, and we just hit it off. And I told him the night before I was leaving to go east, I was like, hey, I'm going up to the Salt Flats and then maybe on from there. Do you want to go with me? And he said, yeah, let's do it. And so us not even knowing each other, strangers, just kind of set off along our way and had the trip of a lifetime. And not to ruin it for anybody, but Ethan's story is probably better than my own. And it was part of the reason I had to, the stories are concise there, but largely they're centered around him, because that trip for him was life-changing as well. Between Ethan and I, we collectively had a lot of friends across the country, and we would just it would navigate that way. Who's where, and let's go see them. And yeah, occasionally you'd stay on hotels when you get tired of sleeping on the ground. We stayed in national parks, and that's beautiful. That's the best way I can recommend when the weather's good to do that. And then we stayed at my family back in the middle of the country. We stayed there with them for a while, and that's where a lot of the story unfolded. Ethan fell in love with a girl back home, and that changed the course of our trip. It's a good story. My mom was an artist, and she really pushed that for me because it was the only thing I could focus on as a kid. I had some attention deficit problems. And art was the constructive solution she came up with. And photography was another one of those things that my mom introduced me to. She was a painter, and she shot all her own still lifes. I think she kind of put that in my hand just to keep me busy as a kid, but it just stuck with me. From, I don't remember what grade, it was probably like third grade, up until I was like, got into high school, she would make me come home, and literally my day before I could ride, and this was how she put it, before I could ride my motorcycle or my bicycle, I had to spend an hour either drawing or writing, just to practice that discipline of focus. And being that school was over with at this hour, and I should be free to do anything I want as a little kid, it was extremely hard to sit down and do that. But she found a way to make that work, and I'm very grateful to her for that. So I honed in some process in doing that, like to sit and be still is very hard. It's still hard for me, but I can do it now, and I can sit down and I can write. It's funny because I think we all really suffer from that. Everybody teaches you how to do something, how to be doing something. No one ever teaches you how to be still with your thoughts. Well, you're sitting on a motorcycle, right? You're sitting and you're only concerned about what's happening at the moment. There's no other influence. You're just completely present. And that is a form of meditation. That's what they try and teach you to do when you meditate or whatever. And to me, I think writing was a form of meditation where you're just kind of watching, when you're in the groove, you're just kind of watching the words come down and through you and onto the page, and not until you're done with a complete thought that's in the moment, then you go back and read it and you're broken from that. But it's a very good feeling to be able to do. Well, I'm really excited once we get out of this pandemic to get out and finish my second book. It's a story I've been writing for 2.5 years now, and I've been looking for a character I met on the road, on the side of the road years back. We had a brief interaction, probably about 10 minutes, but he told me one of the greatest stories of American folklore I had ever heard. I can't divulge too much because I don't want to ruin the picture, but this guy, he was on this bike that he had had since 1970. It was sure enough stamped a 69 cone shovel, one of the earliest cone shovels. I don't know how that's possible, but apparently it is. I'll tell you a little bit about him. He was Janis Joplin's driver and escort through the heyday of her career. And he told me they were broken down in Jacksonville, Florida. The tour bus across the street was a Harley-Davidson dealership. And in the window of this dealership was this bike, this cone nose shovel. And Janis saw him. They were pretty much best friends. She saw him looking at that bike, and she went in, she talked to him, and she bought it for him off the showroom floor. And her name was on the original paperwork. And he's been, she died the next year, but her name is on the original paperwork, and he's been traveling around since then. That's his life. He was one of the most authentic people I have ever met. And so when I said, "Hey, how do I find you?" He's like, "You just got to find me, man. This is how it works." And I said, "I'll do it. I'm going to find you, man." And we went our separate ways. And I've tracked down people who have recognized him. They recognize the bike. He pulls a trailer on that thing up and over mountain passes. It's 103 cubic inches. It's a remarkable machine. So I'm out there. This whole book is about looking for him. I think it's different for a lot of people, but I've thought about it a lot because I've had to attack it in written form so many times with publications and things like that. But there is some real, almost, it's not science. It's just you're looking for the best explanation, right? And I think the best explanation is that it's an altered state, right? You're in this altered state that gives you tremendous focus when you're on a bike. I don't know another way to find it. You are connected to this machine that's an extension of your body now, that is letting you go beyond your physical limitations, and it frees the mind to think about the present, and you consider these bigger concepts and are able to grasp them while you're moving through them. And that's kind of a physical explanation, right? I mean, imagine you're riding down a highway with the sun at your back and your shadows out in front of you. Suddenly you know exactly what your direction is, just because you know which way the sun's going down, you know which way your shadow's pointed. There's the horizon. From there, you can kind of calculate where's home, where I'm going, how far out am I, how much further do I have to go? And then suddenly you realize, well, if I'm going this way, the whole planet's spinning this way. Now I know where I am globally. I don't even know what part of the world's going to see the sun next. And it's all hitting you at once. And that's a magical feeling, man. I think you experience that subconsciously, knowing where you're at. And there's another side of that too. There's the metaphysical side of riding a bike, which is almost harder to explain, but not. And that's going to be different for everyone. But I kind of think about it this way: where you're on this little slice of highway, there's two sides of the road. You know, there's this side over here that's a little darker. It represents things like your thought process now as an adult, which is a little darker and a little more governed by your experiences. And it's different than that idea of the world you had when you were a kid, that at the time was very real. See, that's the other side of the road. You get that level of limitless excitement from riding the bike, and you can't ignore it, and the dark side of the road won't shut it down for you. It's letting you be this excitable kid again. But you got to kind of look at both sides of the road to stay in the middle. There's a groundedness to it, and it's very excitable, and it's very real, and it's just all yours. So I think that ultimately you put those two things together and you have this experience, whether you can define it or not, that it's an altered state. You tell me how else you feel that. I don't know. I haven't found it yet.